Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining. What we're going to do today is talking about strategy and the importance of strategy in negotiations. And why are we here? Well, we are here obviously because we're in a little bit of a special situation in the world. We have a pandemic. We have a different approach to negotiations. And what was before the pandemic an issue by organizations, individuals not working with the strategy has actually spiked into be something that is even more serious today, because having a strategy is essential for your success as an individual as well as the organization that you represent. Now, as you can see on the slide right now, obviously, we are in a different world situation that we were just 6 months ago. And that means that there's an additional attention and focus on negotiation. And that is both existing contracts, existing deals that has to be renegotiated, but it's also everything new that is popping up right now. And obviously, all of us around the globe are experiencing more online negotiations than ever before. And that is even a challenge that we perhaps haven't been prepared for as well. Our research has identified that majority of organizations and professional negotiators, whether you're in politics, commercial negotiation, or even negotiating with your spouse and your kids, don't have a formal negotiation strategy. So what I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this LinkedIn event is actually just sharing my experience and knowledge within the field of creating a negotiation strategy. So let's look into that very briefly. Well, first and foremost, who am I? I'm sure the video said a little bit about it, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. But first and foremost, I'm a dad. There's a lot of negotiation strategy involved being a dad. You're negotiating up to 8,000 to 10,000 times a year. And part of that is obviously the negotiation we have with your kids, your spouse, your colleagues, your suppliers, your clients, your counterparts, whatever you may have. And we need a strategy whenever we do that. Think about a strategy this way. Imagine the organization that you're working for doesn't have a formal communication strategy, doesn't have a research and development strategy, doesn't have a go-to-market strategy, doesn't have a sales strategy, doesn't have a management strategy, doesn't have an HR strategy. That would almost be unthinkable for most major organizations. But then again, most major organizations actually don't really have a firm negotiation strategy. Besides that, I'm an associate professor here in the US, where I live at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, which is part of Arizona State University. I'm lecturing on their master program. I am associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark as well, and an associate professor at BMI Institute located in Lithuania and Belgium, where I teach on their EMBA program as well. I publish a number of books. I'm a keynote speaker when you can travel. And then I am working as an advisor to governments, individual clients, and organizations globally. I've had the honor and pleasure of written and published 24 books around the world. And I'm very humble and honest that people actually want to purchase my book, and I'm even humble and proud that they want to read my book. And I have a very brief story I want to share with you. One of my books have actually been published in China. And I've been to China and doing a book launch, and I'm always asking the audience when I'm done with the book launch, so why did you choose to buy and read one of my books? Now, with 24 books, I've been doing this quite a lot. And, when I'm asking this question in the US or in Denmark or in Norway or in Germany or in France or in Italy or in, you name it, I get a lot of different answers to my question. Why have you chosen to buy and read one of my books? But in China, and I've been there several times on a book tour, asking the Chinese audience this question, I always get the exact same answer to my question. And listen very carefully. I decided to buy and read your book because I want to know how the enemy is thinking. I just repeat that. I bought and read your book because I want to know how the enemy is thinking. As I just said, I never got that answer anywhere else in the world but China. I don't know if any of you have read all Chinese war philosophy and the strategies that came up through the whole thinking in old Chinese philosophy. But if you have, some of you would have encountered the statement that you should never plan your tactics and strategy before you know the one of your enemy. Now, I don't think we should compare negotiation to warfare, but we can still learn something from that statement. And what we can learn about that statement is we should listen to the counterpart and understand the counterpart before we even start planning our own strategy and our own approach. Now, what I do find, and I don't want to provoke anybody, and we just started this webinar, obviously, but what I want to tell everybody is that we have a tendency to be a little bit ecocentric, especially in the Western world. Now, I know we have people joining from everybody in the world. We have Asia, we have Europe, we have North and South America. But in the Western world and with the Western concept, we have a tendency to step into negotiation only thinking, what is my cost? What is my benefit? What is my liabilities? What are my opportunities? And sometimes we completely forget what is the benefit, the cost, the interest, the value to the counterpart. Think about it this way. A great negotiator's purpose is not being great, but helping the counterpart becoming even better. And by helping the counterpart, we can even become more successful ourselves. So that's basically part of what I'm going to share with everybody here today, is really a focus on how can we improve our negotiation in general. Let me just start off by summarizing a study I conducted earlier this year. Actually, it was actually pre-corona. And this was a study I did with IACCM, the International Association of Contract and Commercial Management. It's a global organization with 65,000 members globally within contract, legal, politicians, whatever. What we identified in this study was that 95% of everybody we asked this question said face-to-face negotiation is superior, but that's not really how we're doing stuff. I wasn't surprised about that thing because I truly believe that face-to-face negotiation is superior to virtual negotiation. But what was really interesting is that 70%, and this was actually pre-corona, of all negotiation was conducted partly or completely virtually. And when I talk virtually, I talk phone, email, or video conferencing. That number surprised even me, and I'm living and breathing negotiation. And then we got a spin-off effect as well, and that was 5% of all participants actually said, or only 5% actually felt that they saw negotiation to be truly sincere. So what they're basically saying is they actually saw that a lot of negotiation was basically just an act where people just were trying to negotiate, but it wasn't really a negotiation. Now, why am I sharing this with you? I'm sharing this with you because it's really important to understand that strategy today is even more important if we're not meeting up face-to-face, for the simple reason that virtual negotiations are more complicated than face-to-face negotiation. We need to have better planning, and we need to have a very clear strategy. Just diving into the percentage of 70%. 70% of all negotiation being predominantly virtual. If we dive into that and look at the details, we learned that 41% of all negotiations globally are conducted by email, 38% by phone, and 21% by video. That was scary, because email negotiation is basically a no-go. Listen carefully, and I repeat, email negotiation is basically a no-go. I'm not saying that we shouldn't exchange data or communication during a negotiation by email, but conducting negotiation completely on email is a no-go, for the simple reason it is so complicated. And it's so complicated because written communication leaves so much up to chance. And there's so many areas that we're not covering if we're just email negotiation. So if we can't meet face-to-face, our approach into negotiation should obviously be to try and focus on video. If that doesn't work all the time, phone, and then last but not least, email. Now, in the perfect world, even without COVID-19, I would recommend the use of all four platforms, obviously, the four being face-to-face, video, email, and phone. So that combination is obviously perfect. What we also learned, and if anybody would like a copy of this paper, please send me a message on LinkedIn and I will make sure that you get a copy of this paper. The paper called How Tech Has Disrupted Negotiation, What to Do About It, where we discuss really the different approach we have to negotiation today compared to earlier. But what is really important here is that we learned that 20%, and this is actually remarkable, 20% or less of all organizations actually have a negotiation strategy. This is scary, ladies and gentlemen. So less than 20% of organizations we were asking, and this is major corporations and governments and officials around the world are actually working purposely with a fixed strategy on negotiation. So that's why I got inspired thinking, let's do something about it. Let's start talking about why we need a strategy. Now, we have been working within the field of negotiation as advisors and trainers for more than 35 years. And we have learned 4 things that clearly identify those negotiators that are far more successful than others. And you might want to remember these 4 things because they're really essential. I'm not going to cover all of these 4 today because we simply don't have the time, but I'm just going to go through them very quickly for you to understand the importance of them. First one, obviously, topic today, strategy. Those negotiators who work with a clear identified strategy and involve the counterpart in that strategy are way more successful than those who don't. Second one, trust. About 8 years ago, I woke up one morning and I got a weird stomach sensation. I felt that trust has plummeted in the world. I felt that you and I trusted each other way less than before. I felt that 2 organizations trusted each other way less than ever before. So my stomach sensation was so strong, so I felt I wanted to write a book about this. But you just can't write a book on a stomach sensation because that's very subjective, obviously. That's just my opinion. So I teamed up with World Economic Forum. They went out, did a study among 20,000 people in 15 different countries, and they came back to me and said, Mr. Jensen, do you know what? Your stomach sensation was actually right. Trust has dropped with about 55% in the last 20 years. Now, some of you might be sitting there thinking, oh, really? Well, that's interesting. I wonder when I can have another cup of coffee. Now, why is this a problem that trust has plummeted? Listen very carefully. If we have a high level of trust in any kind of relationship, our transaction costs go down and profit go up. That's simple. If trust goes down in any kind of collaboration, transaction cost goes up and profit go down. That means trust is a monetary value. I have renamed trust in negotiation into trust currency. It's just the 2 words, trust and currency, I put together because there's a monetary value on trust. And it's not something I'm saying, it's something we can actually measure. The third really important thing that clearly shows negotiators that are more successful than anybody else who are not fulfilling these 4 items is rules of the game. And it's really important what I'm sharing with you right now. I know it sounds ridiculous to some of you, but what we need to do is negotiate on how to negotiate with the counterpart. Because negotiation is perceived so differently. You may see negotiation as playing chess. I may see negotiation as playing cards. So that means if you show up ready to play chess and you put the pieces on the chessboard, and I'm showing up with some cards, and we start trying to play this game, it's going to be ridiculous, isn't it? I'm sitting there throwing out the cards, and you're sitting moving your chess pieces around on the board. That's how a lot of people really negotiate, because negotiation is not the same thing for everybody around the world, or not even everybody within the same conference room or in the same company. So we need to negotiate on how to negotiate. We need to agree on a strategy. We need to agree on how we're going to negotiate today. So that's actually almost a pre-negotiation prior to the actual negotiation. Last but not least, the concept of negoeconomics. Unfortunately, we don't have time to do this today. That might be a separate thing I'm doing one day. But negoeconomics means negotiation economics. This is an award-winning mathematical model that basically shows that there's up to 42% left on the table when 2 parties have agreed any kind of deal. So when they have concluded the negotiation, we know that up to 42% of the values are still left on the table without either of the parties identified them, capitalized them, or utilized that value. Isn't that amazing? So what I'm saying really right now is there's an unused potential that you can go out there and grab. It's free. That is up to 42%. But it requires that you have a strategy. It requires trust is present. It requires you have established rules of the game. And it requires, obviously, that you understand negoeconomics. Very quickly, what is negoeconomics? Very simple. It's the difference between your cost and my value, or my cost and your value. So it's basically the asymmetric difference between your value and my cost, or opposite. Now, let me just share very quickly what I mean about trust, because trust is so essential that we need to spend a little bit more time on that. Trust is essential, as I just said, because it carries a monetary value. And I have a colleague, Professor Jankovic, who wrote a book called Profit with Honor that I would truly recommend if you do have an interest into ethics, moral, and trust. And the measurement he did was, as you can see on the screen right now, he actually measured that back in the 50s, the trust was actually kind of high. And then it just increased and dropped and increased and dropped. And today it is actually the lowest level ever recorded. Now, why? That's a whole different session, a whole different webinar another day. But it's just really important to understand that trust is a competitive edge, or will give you a competitive edge, and is something that is really essential the second that we start talking about negotiation in general. Now, let's move on a little bit and start to talk about the topic of today, which is the choice of strategy. We basically have three major boxes we can divide strategy choice into. One of these boxes is what is called zero sum. Sure, all of you have heard this term before. Zero sum basically means I'm winning at your expense. So if I want to win an additional $100, you're going to pay for that. If you want to win an additional $100, I'm going to pay for that. So the progress of one side is always happening at the expense of the counterpart. Nobody can win without the counterpart is losing. This is happening a lot in the political world. It's happening a lot in the commercial world. It's happening a lot in your household. It's basically a very traditional, what I would call an old school approach into how we negotiate, right? But this is a very, very used approach. I'm going into details in a second. The alternative to zero sum is partnership. And partnership is probably one of the more abused words in the world, because quite often when I'm working with clients and students and I ask them, what's your negotiation strategy? Some of them are saying it's partnership. We are working in partnership with our suppliers or our clients or our colleagues or whatever. And when I dive into that and challenge them on that strategy, what we really learn is that they're truly working in zero sum, but it's a long-term zero sum. Because people accidentally believe that if they're in a long-term relationship, even though it's a long-term zero sum, we can call that partnership. That is far from partnership. A true partnership means that the parties actually want each other. They want to work with each other. They focus on how can I actually gain something without you paying for it, and how can you actually gain something without I'm paying for it. They may have established some rules of the game, but what they are missing at this point is perhaps establishing the amount of trust, full transparency, and actually identified how we're going to negotiate. So they haven't addressed the issue on negotiating, how to negotiate. They haven't gone into details on preparing the negotiation, and they might still be negotiating one side chess, the other side playing cards. The third strategy headline I want to share with you today is the award-winning model of Smartership. And Smartership has been awarded by a lot of organizations around the world, I'm proud to announce. One of them is the Organization of Public Procurement Officers in Denmark. They call it the best negotiation strategy. And it basically said it's thinking out of the box. It's just approaching negotiation in a completely different manner. Why? It's really very simple. There's nothing complicated rocket science in Smartership. The big difference in Smartership is that it's completely opposite from zero sum. In a Smartership negotiation, as I said earlier, you are a great negotiator if you're not focusing on being great, but focusing on helping your counterpart. So in a Smartership negotiation, you will help your counterpart become more successful, but not at your expense, and you will ask your counterpart to help you become more successful, but not at their expense. So that means the focusing, utilizing macroeconomics, the additional value between the parties, identifying the asymmetric interest, and whether it's money or time or value or politics or whatever, doesn't matter, but you're focusing on how can we actually help each other becoming better at what we're doing. So in a Smartership negotiation, I would, for instance, open up negotiation by saying, I'm here today helping you become more successful, reducing your cost, reducing your liabilities, and improving your profit. Would you be interested in me helping you doing that? I can promise you, if you try and ask this question out there in reality, you'll have a lot of people who will be hesitant, a little bit quiet, but then they will say, sure, that sounds great. And then you have to reverse that question and say, by the way, I believe your purpose of being here today is helping me reducing my cost, my liabilities, and helping me improving my profit. So if we're in agreement with that, our purpose today is actually working together to help each other out, becoming more successful and reducing our cost and our risk. So we are basically trying to change the mindset of a negotiator from going into a negotiation thinking win-lose into how can we work together as a team. It's really suddenly teamwork where we're trying to solve a problem that is not your problem or my problem, but our problem. So how can we do that together? Well, let's go a little bit more into details and talking about how this concept can be worked with. We have the zero sum, and as I just said, in a zero sum, parties negotiate for a division of cost, risk, liabilities, and rights. And our success will always happen at the expense of the counterpart. So it's one against one. That means we can only have a winner and a loser, or in worst case, a loser situation throughout. So a typical zero sum is represented by negotiators that might be combative, that might be compromising, that might be holding back information, is really not interested in sharing, and is really not interested in transparency, openness. There's a lot of bluff. There might even be some lying. which actually inspires me because sometimes I am out doing lecturing and speaking, and I often say that I don't believe that we should lie in a negotiation. I honestly don't. I believe that honesty is the best way forward. And then I meet a lot of people that agree with me completely. But then they say, I never lie, but I bluff just a tiny bit. And then I get confused because what is the big difference between bluffing and lying? I don't really get it, because it's like if you walk up to a pregnant woman and ask her, are you pregnant? And she says, no, only a little bit. I mean, it's not possible. You can't be pregnant just a little bit. Either you are honest or you are not. Now, a challenging question. Is it dishonest behavior, holding back information, not sharing information? Absolutely not. If you just give everything away in a negotiation, you would be perceived naive, which is bad as well. So it's all about timing. When do you do that at the right time? Let's dive into the next strategy we talked about, which is obviously partnership. In a partnership-oriented negotiation, the parties are committed finding a common solution to reduce cost and increase profit. Basically, like I said, it's basically the same as if we were in a Smartership. But the difference here in this negotiation style is, back to what I said, we don't have the exact rules of the game on the table. We may not have verbalized trust as well. Where in a Smartership that we're going to talk about in a second, we actually verbalizing rules of the game, and we're talking about what happens if we loses trust, if trust decreases, and how can we mutually help each other increase trust. So we have not necessarily rules of the game in place. We may not have trust, and we may not have transparency and full openness in a partnership. But the great thing is the parties in this negotiation strategy actually want each other. So progress is based on the creation of success for one without the loss of the other. And we do see in this behavior, it's two acting as two, but with limited disclosure and collaboration. Now, let's move into Smartership. And when we're talking about Smartership, we have here a situation where the parties have agreed on the rules of the game. That means they have spent time prior to a negotiation discussing how we're going to negotiate today. And if I can tell you something I would love all of you to leave with today after this session is try and implement rules of the game before your negotiation. Rules of the game is, for instance, how we're going to negotiate today. Are we going to be open and honest and share information? What happens if we feel that trust is dropping? What are the variables we want to negotiate? A variable is everything that is negotiable. That could be time, it could be warehouse, it could be cost, it could be price, it could be warranty. Whatever might be negotiable for you is a variable. You would list all of them from the beginning and agree on those. Besides that, you would also openly discuss which of those variables could carry economics. What happens when we conclude how we're going to share that pie, so on and so forth. So there's a number of items that you need to agree on and focus on when you start your negotiation before you can become successful in negotiation in general, but specifically in Smartership. So back to Smartership. The parties have agreed on rules of the game. They're very conscious about the process on developing variables and generate added value, which is economics. The negotiation is typically open and honest and creative without either one being naive. So this is really truly two working seamlessly together in an informed collaboration. So this is like the perfect above partnership negotiation that we can actually achieve. Now, if we look at this model, it's a model I've created called the SAM model, the Strategy Assessment Matrix. And regardless what kind of negotiation that you might be involved in, this is extremely useful to help you, assist you in your choice of strategy. Because should you always use a Smartership strategy? The answer to that is no, you shouldn't always use it. It may be a surprise to some of you, but sometimes zero sum is actually the right way forward. But what I hate is when we accidentally stumble into zero sum or accidentally stumble into Smartership. It has to be something that we have carefully planned for. So look at the model that we have on the screen right now. As you can see, we have 4 quadrants in here, and we have a vertical line and our horizontal line. The vertical line shows how important you are for your counterpart. Okay, so the higher that you go on the vertical line, the more important you are for the counterpart. The further down south you go, the less important you are for your counterpart. If you look at the horizontal line, this shows how important the counterpart might be for you. So the further you go to the right, the more important the counterpart might be to you. The further you go to the left, the less important the counterpart might be to you. So I have a question for all of you right now, and that question is, if you're sitting with a counterpart that is very important to you and you're very important to the counterpart, which of the 4 quadrants should we use? Or should we negotiate in? Is it high impact, medium risk, low impact, low risk, low impact, medium risk, or high impact, high risk? Obviously, we will end up in this one, because if they are very important to you and you are very important to them, we are up in high impact, high risk. And here comes the $1 million question of the day. Which of the 3 negotiation strategies should we then be using? Smartership, partnership, or zero sum? I'll give you a second to think that one through. Those of you who didn't say Smartership are absolutely wrong and didn't win. But those of you who said Smartership got it right. Obviously, up here, we have to use Smartership. I want to provoke everybody just a tiny bit and saying, by not using Smartership, if you're sitting with a counterpart that is important to you, and you're important to them and they're important to you, by not using Smartership, you are never going to utilize the best potential outcome in your negotiation. So, on the other hand, if you're sitting in a market or with a counterpart that's really not important to you, there are plenty of counterparts out there that could replace the one you're sitting in front of. And if the same thing goes for you, your counterpart are looking at you thinking there are plenty of parties out there that could easily replace that counterpart we're sitting in front of right now. If that is the case, what strategy could you actually be using on purpose then? Those of you saying zero sum are absolutely right. We could on purpose down here choose zero sum, and it might be the right approach. So one of the challenges I would like to give you when we're done with this broadcast today is actually sit at home very quickly and think about your negotiation universe, the people you are negotiating with, and try and put them into a box. How many counterparts do I have up in high impact, high risk? How many counterparts do I find down in low impact, low risk? And if we are in partnership, we obviously up here top left corner or bottom right corner. So it's really down to how you choose your strategy and how you want to conduct your negotiation. But that requires careful planning, obviously, so you don't mess up and start the wrong negotiation strategy with a counterpart. Now, the world obviously is not black and white. What do I mean by that? Well, it's not always a perfect world. So you might actually have agreed Smartership with a counterpart and then meet zero sum in part of that negotiation. Absolutely fine. You could start out in Smartership, have a period where you end up in zero sum. As long as you conclude in Smartership, everybody's happy. The same goes for the other strategies as well. You could have a zero sum that have small openings of partnership or Smartership and then continues in zero sum. So it's not always just black and white. It's not always just pure Smartership or pure zero sum. I just need you to be aware of what strategy are you involved in right now and what strategy is the right one for that negotiation you're in. What scares me a little bit is that I'm an associate professor at Aalborg University in Denmark. And what I've seen there is a lot of people from the parliament in Denmark, ministers and just members of parliament, have chosen to read their MBA at Aalborg University. And that means I had the opportunity and chance to talk to some of the parliament members in Denmark. And I often ask them, so what do you do about the drop in trust in society? And the typical response I get from a lot of these people is absolutely silence, because they don't really know what to say about that. And the problem is they don't have a fixed negotiation strategy either. And imagine sitting in a negotiation. Let's just take the US. You have Democrats and Republicans, obviously. They are really depending on each other, but they're doing zero sum day in and day out. Is that a smart strategy? No, it's not. Instead, they should focus on the outcome. What is the outcome is obviously what's best for the country and for the world, and start collaborating. Remember again what I've been saying a couple of times already. We have to change the mindset of what is a negotiation. A negotiation is not the old school thing that we did in 1850, where we have to win at the expense of the counterpart. But we're still negotiating like we did in 1850s. Majority of us are anyway. So it's really important to figure out how can we change that mindset and how can we shift gears and move into more collaborative mode when it makes sense. So there's obviously, as I just said, areas where we shouldn't do it, and there's the areas where it certainly makes sense to move into more collaboration. I just want to share this brief story with you just before we wrap up today. And the question is to all of you, have any of you read The Wealth of Nations? If anybody of you have been studying economics in your life, I'm sure some of you have encountered this book. And The Wealth of Nations was written in 1700 by a Scottish philosopher by the name of Adam Smith. That might ring a bell for some of you. Now, the reason that people in economics read The Wealth of Nations is that it is considered the Bible of modern economics. So that means that a lot of people perceive Adam Smith's thinking as the foundation of how we trade, in the world today. That's basically how we do business with each other. There are two problems with this book that I want to share with you right now. And one problem with this book is it's really a heavy thing to read. It is not that entertaining. There's a lot of words in it, and it's a big book. So that's one reason I would recommend you not to read it. The other reason, by the way, almost as important as the first one is, it is absolutely wrong. Isn't that amazing? I'm just sitting here telling you right now that the book that is considered the Bible of the financial system is absolutely wrong. And thank God I'm not the only one saying that. There are people that are way brighter than me that have been saying the exact same thing for years. And one of them is the famous Dr. Nash. And Dr. Nash was an American professor who won the Nobel Prize in economics back in the 60s. He was so famous, so they actually did a movie about him called The Beautiful Mind. I'm sure some of you have watched that movie. If you haven't, please go home and do. That could be your homework for the day. Because Dr. Nash is actually the founder of the concept that we have built on that we call economics. He was called the father of game theory, and game theory is really the psychology that creates economics and so on and so forth. Russell Crowe played Dr. Nash wonderfully, by the way, I think, and Dr. Nash was without any doubt a genius. He was so bright, so he was balancing right there on the edge between being a genius and completely insane. You know, you're up there where you're a little bit of both, but without any doubt, he was a genius. And Dr. Nash was looking into the whole philosophy of Adam Smith. And Adam Smith said in his book, The Wealth of Nations, the best result comes from everyone in the group is doing what is best for themselves. Dr. Nash said that is incomplete. It is wrong. The best result will come from everyone in the group is doing what is good for themselves and the group. That is the only way we all can win. Now, I'm just keeping that slide on the screen for a second because think really deeply about this sentence here. The best result will come from everybody in the group doing what is best for themselves and the group at the same time. That's the only way we can truly win. This is basically wrapping up Smartership. This is basically approaching a philosophy where we change the mindset on how to negotiate. We move away from old school zero-sum, I win at your expense, and trying to focus on making 2 + 2 equal more than 4. Again, go home, watch the movie. Even if you haven't watched it, I'm sure it's on a streaming service somewhere. It's great education, and specifically pay attention to the scene in the bar where Nash is sitting talking to his student colleagues. Now, if we should just wrap up, we're getting close to the end. Talking about the 3 strategies that I mentioned today, we have zero-sum. And you can be successful in zero-sum. One of the biggest retail companies based in the US, but located in many countries, not naming any names, are using zero-sum quite a lot, especially in their negotiation with suppliers. And you couldn't argue that they're not successful in what they're doing. I would, however, though, make a mark and saying I believe they could be even more successful if they change their behavior into Smartership. But that's a different story. We can then move into partnership, and we will be financially more successful working in partnership than zero-sum, no question about it. And obviously, based on what we talked about today, Smartership is the way to go if you want to create more success for your organization, not only monetary value, but any kind of value. And at the same time, you also create a different level of satisfaction with your counterpart. This is all down to culture as well, because we don't negotiate the same way around the world. And I have a colleague, Erin Meyer, an American who wrote a book called Getting to See, Yeah, We, and Da. Great book focusing on negotiation and culture. And culture is not only something that going from the US to Korea and going from Germany to Italy. Culture is something that happens within the country, and it's something that happens within a company as well. Your company or organization have one culture. You might be meeting another organization across the street that have a completely different culture. So culture is not only looking at the global thing. But just look at this slide up here that Erin created, where we have emotionally expressive people, we have emotionally unexpressive people, we have more confrontational negotiators, and we have people negotiators that want to avoid confrontation. And as you can see on this slide, we obviously have a tremendous difference from one group to the other. So if we're talking about Israelis, they will typically in a negotiation be emotionally expressive and confrontational. It might be harder to achieve Smartership in a culture like that than if you go to Japan, Korea, Sweden, or the UK. So when we're down here, it might be easier just for the simple fact that we are not as confrontational. We might be listening a little bit more. And the good thing, though, about being emotionally expressive is that we may get the understanding of the counterpart. So in this mixture, this recipe I'm sharing with you right now, we have to drop in this spice called culture as well, because not everybody is obviously identical in how we negotiate. Now, when we talk about strategy, we've been talking about zero sum, partnership, and smartership. Then we have 5 different styles within that concept as well. We have combative orientated negotiators, concession orientated negotiators, stalling, delaying orientated negotiators, compromise and collaboration orientated negotiators. But when we talk about in general being successful in negotiation, I presented this slide right now, and I would like all of you to pay attention. I presented this slide everywhere in the world. I've been doing it in Tokyo, in Shanghai, in Beijing, in Kuala Lumpur, in Singapore, in Melbourne, in Copenhagen, in London, in Madrid, in Paris, in Washington, D.C., in Los Angeles, you name it, it's been there. And my question is always, would you agree with the content of this slide? And I know I'm simplifying, but very quickly just going through this slide. What I'm saying is that in order to be successful in negotiation, it requires that you're open, honest, show respect, and have confidence. If that happens, that will lead you into a positive, progressive attitude that will end up in good working personal chemistry between you and the counterpart. That was the top line. Bottom line, it also requires knowledge, creativity, generosity, and authority to negotiate. Never negotiate with somebody that doesn't have a mandate to negotiate. Now, if you're successful doing that, that will give you the ability to negotiate and communicate. And that will lead into increased understanding of your negotiation, which once again, combined with personal chemistry working, will lead you into collaboration. Now, look what happens right now. If we have an improved collaboration, that will give us problem solving instead of combat. It will give us the opportunity to create added value, increase possibilities, and it will give us increased understanding. And if we achieve all of that, we will reduce cost, we will reduce risk, and we will improve profit. So we will truly create a negotiation with 2 winners. Now, when I share this slide around the world, I'm always asking people, would you agree with the content to this slide? And you know what happens? The vote is in, 100% everywhere agrees with this slide. Okay, so whether you're in Malaysia, China, Japan, US, Spain, Italy, Germany, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, wherever you are, I never had anyone saying, nope, that's not what I want. I don't want openness, honesty, transparency. I don't want increased understanding. I don't want working personal chemistry. I don't want collaboration. I don't want to reduce risk and cost and improve profit. Nobody has ever told me that. Everybody's always agreeing, saying, funny you mentioning what is on that slide. That is exactly what I want. So, good news, ladies and gentlemen. After I've learned that, I have grown my belief in the future for humankind, because we actually all want the same at the negotiation table. Very few people want to be a con artist. Very few people want to abuse the situation and win at the expense of the counterpart. But very often we just simply don't know how to alternatively negotiate, because we learn to negotiate by our colleagues, or we were on some training course, or we read a book, or we just looked at our managers or colleagues and saw how they did it, and then we just copy that. Or even worse, we're watching on how to negotiate on Hollywood movies, which is always doing it a more dramatic way because that's TV, right? But we really have to change the mindset on what negotiation might be perceived like. Okay. Now, one of the things I can offer you guys is that we have a whole online universe with online masterclasses in negotiation. If you're interested, you can just go to my webpage, www.kjeldjensen.com. There's a button up there called Online Negotiation. You can drop in there and see how we train clients globally in the choice of strategy, the typical different behaviors, how to create trust, how to utilize economics. And we have classes in there from 90 hours all the way down to just a day. So you have a whole different options of different classes that you can do. We have self-paced classes. That means you can do it all by your own without any interference from us. And we have hybrid classes where there's actually live webinars and live classes and office hours where you can get support and training from us as well. So that's an opportunity for everybody. Then I have a gift for you, and if you want, I know some of you have been downloading already, but if you go to kjeldjensenshop.com, you can download for absolutely free my latest ebook that I wrote for that purpose, just being free, called Negotiating Your Way Through the COVID-19 Crisis. And I did it simply because I want to help. We have so many negotiations going on and so many negotiations that's going to happen that we need to know how to deal with these negotiations. So jump on that website, use the coupon down there called Smartership 2020 when they ask to pay, and you can download this book for absolutely free. There's no cost related to that. Now, I just want to say thank you so much for participating. I was trying to do all of this within 45 minutes. It was a pleasure being invited to LinkedIn Live to share my focus on strategy. I'm sure I will be returning with other topics surrounding negotiation. My focus and mission is basic, just to try organizations and individuals to get better at the art of negotiation. And that's what I'm doing globally. So thank you so much for your attention. I wish you all the best. Have a great summer and good luck with all your negotiations. Thank you so much for